Well, welcome to our backyard. I'm Dr. Russ. This is our backyard in southeast Michigan, and we're going to have some fun today. We're going to teach you something about mounting a scope on your air rifle. Now, some of you have never done it before. Some of you have done it a dozen times. But I think even those will have something to learn from today, because I've got over 20 air guns and 40 powder guns and 20 pistols. So I've done a lot of mounting and remounting scopes and red dots, etc. between them. Let me just say this. If you've never used a big gulp plastic cup when you mounted a scope, then maybe you'll learn something today. You know, it's kind of nice when you do add some optics to your guns, air rifle or powder, because it brings that target so much up closer to you. But make no mistake, they've got to be mounted correctly, and that's an art, and then I think you're going to learn the art by watching this video. First of all, we have to understand that the scope, put this down, the scope and the rifle and the scope are not perfect. One is off a hair, one is off this way. I'm over exaggerating, of course, but make no mistake, you just don't bolt them on a gun and they're perfectly aimed at the target. And so we have to compensate for that. First of all, we have to understand that there's different mounting brackets to put the scope on. There's the Weaver, which is probably the most popular and most familiar to Americans. And then the Picanti rails have come along, and they're in a couple of different dimensions. And so we need to know that the scope mounts here are going to fit this mounting bracket. When we get the scope, sometimes they'll just have one screw on each side. Sometimes they have two. Here's one that has three. And of course, the more screws, the better we're going to secure this scope into its proper shooting position. We've also got two different tube sizes. I think you can tell the difference. The one here to your right is what we call a 1-inch tube. America's had them for years and years and years. Along came the 30-millimeter tube. I believe it originated in Europe, and it's a little bigger. Now, the only advantage this tube has over this tube is if you're hunting in early morning or late afternoon dark, because the larger the tube, the more light that can come in. And trust me when I tell you that the big bucks, the big elk, the big turkeys, they're coming in early morning or right at dusk, and that's when you really have a chance to shoot at them. I see a lot of does and fawns in the middle of the day, but those big ones are in the early morning and afternoon. So we need to know these kinds of things that we're working with, because that changes these scope mounts that are put on. Are we mounting a 30-millimeter tube? Are we mounting a 1-inch tube? And then we need to know where we can mount them so that they are out of the way of this magazine here in the middle. There's just so much leeway. Also, something we need to know is how far back is our eye, usually about 2 inches. And so that affects this scope going forward and back, so that there's about 2 inches. What is the exact measurement? Well, when you're looking through, you want to see just the opening. When I put my eye up real close, I see a lot of the insides of this scope and then this opening at the end. When I come back too far, then I see a very tiny bit of light at the end of the scope to look at. So I'm wanting to come forward or back so that that opening at the other end with the crosshairs in it comes right into the perfected size that I'm looking at through here. There are a couple of focus areas. This, of course, is the end and where we can focus to my eyesight, to your eyesight, etc. The focus. Sometimes the scope is variable, so we're able to turn the power higher or lower. It's best to keep the power on low while you're hunting, so that when you quickly see something and you do a snap up, we can find it. If I set this up at high power, well, I might be looking for a long time before I find the deer or the turkey or whatever it was that I saw. So we want it low. Now, why do we want a high power? Well, we definitely do on powder guns. I'm not positive how much high power we need on air guns. It's all about the distance out we're shooting, but we want to, at least I want to, come in to the head. And on deer, I want to see those horns coming out of the head. I want to see if they're big and have what we call mass. I want to see if they're just skinny and plain bone. Now, when they get big, they have these nubbins on them, and I actually like to see those. That's me. So that's when, after I've spotted him, and assuming that he's not moving fast, I can change the power of this scope to check him out. Is this the trophy buck that I want to take home? Something else I'm looking for when I zoom in on him is the shape of the rack. A lot of them just come up to a nice basket look like this, but the really big trophies, they are more box shaped like this. And so I want the scope to look in and see, does he have mass? Is it a box shaped? That's what I'm looking for when I come in and use this scope. Another thing that I like to use is my gun level when I'm shooting? Is it level? Because I can tell you that this gun, by me, can be tilted sideways because I'm not holding it correctly. But this bubbler tells me that I am holding it correctly. You can see the bubble going right into the center right now. That's what we want when we actually pull the trigger. Let me tell you why that's so important. We know that when we adjust the crosshairs up or down, what happens here is we're letting the bullet come lower or higher, left or right based upon wind. And if this gun is tilted, and I agree I'm tilting it a lot just to make my point, but when we come out to here, remember the crosshairs are still this way and this way. And when I make adjustments up here on that, I'm nowhere configured to that target. I think this is level when it is not. So it's very important that we learn to shoot level. Now, what else do we need to know when we actually mount the gun? Well, we've got to make sure that it's 2 inches away, and we put these mounts on the bottom but not on the top, and we lay the scope in to this horseshoe shape of these rings, and I can turn the whole thing to make sure that the scope crosshairs are perfectly up and down, and I can get it positioned correctly. Then I worry about putting these scope caps on and screwing them down tight. At this moment, the gun is not sighted in, but at least it's mounted correctly. The crosshairs are perpendicular and horizontal. It's 2 inches from my eye. Everything seems to be okay. I may want to put some Loctite on these, particularly if I have a Springer or a brake barrel, because those guns do a real chatter in your arm, and they can ultimately shake these things loose. PCP air rifles don't quite have that much movement, and often when we tighten it down, that's all that we need to know. Now, how in the world did I use a big gulp cup out of 7-Eleven or a McDonald's large drink cup from a McDonald's hamburger in mounting this scope. Well, sometimes when you get it mounted and you get it into a steady position and you're shooting on the targets. Now, this one, I don't have caps. Others, like this one, I have to take caps off, and I have to unscrew these caps. So that I can see in here to know, am I moving this gun, or rather the crosshairs, I should say, the bullet up or down on that target. Some of the caps, like this, I don't have to take the cap off at all. It's already telling me, and I just move the entire device up here, up or down. But what if I've moved it all the way? Now just imagine for a moment that my arm here's the barrel and this is the scope, and because they're not perfectly parallel, they should be, but they're not. What if the barrel's really aiming down like this and the scope is like this? How can I get the back of the scope up? Since I've done all the adjustments and it's still not enough. The device you're looking for is something called shims. They're little horseshoe shaped, thin metal, and they cost a lot at a gun store or through the internet. In fact, I checked eBay the other day. I couldn't even find any shims, metal shims, on eBay. So what you can do, and it works very well, particularly with air guns, but it works with powder guns too, is that we get a large empty cup from one of the drink companies. It can be 7-Eleven's, Big Gulp, it can be McDonald's, Burger King, but we want the plastic cup. And we take scissors, and we're going to cut little squares about half the size, maybe 2/3 the size of a postage stamp. And we're going to lay it down and then put the scope on top of it. That tiny shim allows the back of the scope to go up. I could put the shim on the inside over here on its side, and that moves the back of this scope towards you. I can put it over here and it moves the back of the scope towards me. Just that piece. And then you bolt it back down and you try to sight it again. Now keep in mind, if we're looking at crosshairs on the rifle and we're putting it right onto the bullseye, but your bullets are hitting down here, we've got to raise it. And then we've got to do the sideways to bring them in. So there's two adjustments here to be made. Most of the instructions will tell you that each click of one of these adjustments is 1/4 of an inch at 100 yards. Well, we're often not doing an air gun out to 100. Some of us are, some are not. The majority are not. So that little adjustment thing there isn't speaking directly to us. What we need to do is just make some adjustments. And again, if the crosshairs are here, but the bullet's out here, we make a few and shoot. We make a few and shoot. We make a few and shoot. And then we make a few and shoot across until they come together. And once they come right on into that bullseye, now this scope and this barrel, which weren't aimed exactly in parallel to one another, and we can't bend the barrel, but we can adjust those crosshairs to bring the two in a line and to shoot. Now, if all of my shooting and all of my crosshairs are done at 30 yards, what happens when I go hunting and here comes a squirrel, a woodchuck, a possum, a raccoon, and he's 50 yards out, 60, 80, 90, but all of my practice was at 30 in my backyard. And obviously my crosshairs are not good. But because all bullets, whether they're powder gun bullets or air pellets, they go up and they come down. But the crosshairs are looking at a straight line between you and your target. I have found that when I put my guns targeted in at 30 yards, that bullet is actually climbing and hits the bullseye, even though the crosshairs are on it. It then climbs higher, and then it drops back down. As a general rule, most air guns, most pellets, at 60 yards. In other words, when I tuned my gun up for 30 yards, my scope, it was also good for 60. Out in the field, again, because these guns are so quiet, we could be hunting, but we could check a 90-yard shot by finding out, particularly if your scope has mil dots or hash marks on it, that maybe just 2 hash marks up and we're hitting the target at 90. But I know one thing for sure, my gun is sighted in for 30, it's sighted in for 60, and I have to then depend upon some mil dots to shoot farther than that. I also know mil dots to the left and right is all based on wind. Now I've had guys say, oh, it's windy today, let's not target in our guns. And I say, no, that's actually wrong. We need to target in our guns on wind. It could be windy the day we go hunting. It's windy today. And this is an ideal time to find out on your scope, your gun, your caliber, your air pressure. Do we want it just a couple of mil dots to the left, a couple to the right? Just what? I think if you use those tips, they're going to help you a lot when they come into getting your air gun just as accurate as it can be. Now, I've got another video coming up, and we're going to discuss all the rest of the optics, including even a spotting scope that you might use when you have a gun in the field. In the meantime, keep giving us thumbs up, subscribe so that you get notified when this next one comes, and also leave a comment. I enjoy those comments. I answer them all. We get comments from all over the world, and we've got 2,000 subscribers, so they didn't seem to complain. They don't seem to be in any type of a hardship, so they must enjoy being subscribed. Get a subscription yourself and make sure you get all of these airgun videos. Until then, stay airgun sharp.